everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today I'd like to discuss how to be a better BDSM student / how to get the most out of your BDSM classes. Now, I am very passionate about participating in the BDSM community and in particular taking BDSM classes. While it's by no means a requirement of participating in the BDSM community, there is nothing online that really quite replaces the same sort of feedback you get and the same sort of social interaction you get when you're actually going to an in-person class with an actual instructor in a classroom setting. There is just nothing else like it. And so I think, especially if you're somebody who maybe hasn't been in a classroom setting for a long time, there are some things that you should know in order to get the most out of your experience. And some of this might seem pretty obvious to those of you who are still in school and are still actively taking classes, but there are a few little oddities to keep in mind with it being the BDSM community when you are going through the process of going to BDSM classes and deciding where you want to go. The first thing that I want to talk about, and to me at least is the really key important first step, is you should research the educator whose class you are interested in going to. If you're going to a class at a convention or one that is hosted by a local dungeon, they usually will do their best to vet the person, get a sense of their reputation, review any previous feedback they've gotten, and generally speaking, if they do have a not so good reputation, if people see that they have been invited to go to a certain location, they will probably post about it, they will message the event about it, people will speak up if this person is known as a bad person. Doesn't always happen, but oftentimes there is a lot of social backlash if a dungeon or a convention tries to bring in somebody that's, say, a known consent violator. But when you're on FetLife, it's not just dungeons and conventions that bring people in to host classes. Especially with service and with rope bondage, a lot of people host things in their own home, and you see that Joe Schmo, who lives a mile from you, is hosting a best boot blacking class ever. But you've never seen Joe Schmo before, you've never heard of him before. How are you supposed to know if he's actually legit and actually knows what he's talking about? Now, being able to vet people is a complicated process, and if you're not yet in the BDSM community, if you don't have those connections yet, I'm not expecting you to be perfect at this, but I would encourage you to do your due diligence, see who is on the RSVP list, see if you can message them and get feedback from anybody else that they've taught classes to before or events that they've hosted, see if they have any feedback on their wall on FetLife or if they have a note that allows people to give feedback. Post a message in your community group board that says, hey, I see so-and-so is teaching a class, would you mind telling me about it? If somebody is a good educator, they generally won't have any problems explaining how the class is going to go, what the structure is like, and they should especially be open to feedback and criticism. That is a really, really important thing. And in that same vein, I think it is also really important to make sure you read the class description. I know, it seems obvious, but there are so many people who don't think to really read through the class description. They just see the title or they just see the event posting and they don't think about it any further. But please, please, please make sure you read the event description. Make sure you have an understanding of what's going to be happening. If you're going to, say, a blood play class, it would probably be a good idea to know if this is going to be demo-focused, participation-focused, lecture-focused, so on and so forth, because all of those things will affect your learning experience and potentially if this is something that you're comfortable doing or not. If you're going to a rope bondage class and they're saying that you need to be proficient in a 3-rope TK before you participate, and you have no idea what that is, probably not the best idea to go to that class. Maybe you should think about going to some other classes. Once you have actually decided on the class that you want to go to and you're feeling good about your decision, you know that this person is a good educator, they have a good reputation, the class seems like a good fit, you want to make sure you show up early. And there's a specific reason for this besides just mere politeness, although it is always good to be polite. But oftentimes BDSM centers will lock their doors once time is up. So you should always plan to be early in case traffic happens or it's hard to find parking or you have to stop and get gas, because if you show up at 8:01 and doors lock at 8 o'clock, well, shoot, you've paid $25 for a class you can't even take now. So I would really encourage you to plan to go early. The other advantage, besides making sure that you don't accidentally get locked out, is to be able to find a good seat. And I'm kind of a nerd, and I'm kind of really into learning about things, so maybe this is just me, but I always personally like to find a seat that is maybe not directly in the front row, but is maybe like 2 or 3 rows back in the middle of the classroom, so that way I have like direct line of sight on the presentation that the presenter is doing. Well, BDSM classes very oftentimes fill up. I have been to several classes where they've had to try and pull extra chairs, or people have had to sit on the floor in the front row. So being able to go early will ensure that you don't end up in that particular position. Now, the next thing that I recommend is bringing a notebook. Obvious, I know, and a pen too. But I know I myself have forgotten numerous times to bring a notebook to every single class that I go to, and I've always been burned by it. The conversation goes in interesting directions. The presenter brings up something I didn't think we were going to cover in that class, and I go, gosh dang it, why didn't I bring my notebook? And you may have access to your phone, but a lot of BDSM spaces, particularly if they're conventions, will not allow you to have your phone out while the presentation is happening. So the thing you do in college, where you take a picture of the whiteboard at the end of the lecture and use that for your notes, not necessarily a thing in the BDSM world. You need to have it on paper rather than bringing a laptop or trying to take it on your phone, because those things may not be allowed in the space that you're in. Also, while you can try to rely on just remembering the things that have been said, especially if these are newer concepts to you or you're being introduced to it for the first time, you are not going to fully absorb that or absorb that as best as you could if you are only listening to it. Listening to it, writing it down, and reviewing it afterwards is one of the best things that you can do in order to retain the information. And if you haven't written anything down, you're not necessarily going to have the complete information to be able to revisit it later. And especially when it's been 2 or 3 years since you've taken a class, you're going to be really thankful that you have those notes so you can refer back to them when you're, say, negotiating for a humiliation scene and the last time you talked about it was 2 years ago. So just things to keep in mind. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is ask questions, but do so thoughtfully. I don't know how many classes I've been to where the presenter just didn't really know how to stay on topic, and they would suddenly let the audience get completely down a rabbit hole, and then suddenly the whole thing that we were supposed to be talking about was just completely thrown out the window. And that's very frustrating. So a lot of presenters, in response to that, have gone kind of the other way, and they have very, not necessarily strict, very specific criteria of how they will handle questions and how they'll handle feedback. So I generally follow the philosophy that unless I am told otherwise, I will allow the presenter to say whatever they have to say. And unless it's a specific question about the subject that they just touched on, I will save my questions until the end. Couple of reasons for that. One, I don't want to interrupt the flow of the discussion and get on a tangent, because I personally don't enjoy that, and I don't want to contribute to the tangent train that could potentially happen if I do that. Two, if it's not a discussion group focused class, if the presenter has a certain amount of slides and information that they need to go through, particularly if it's something that is technique focused or medically relevant or safety relevant, I don't want the presentation to get completely off track, and then at the end they have to go, well, we got too many questions, so we're not going to be able to cover this last 20 minutes of content. Again, not something that I want to have happen. Also, chances are they could answer my question with the very next slide or the very next point that they bring up, and oftentimes questions will be answered with a response like, don't worry, we're going to be getting to that in a moment. So I try to kind of save my questions until the end to make sure that I'm giving the presenter the time that they have been allotted to give their complete presentation, and then allow for any questions that haven't been covered to happen at the end. And that is how a lot of educators kind of focus their lecture-focused classes, save your questions for the end. And that is personally the philosophy that I think is the best to follow, because, hey, you've paid $25 or whatever it is to hear this person speak. So give them the full time to speak, and then be able to ask them questions once they have gone through everything in the process. Oftentimes the presenter will stay late for feedback. There are forms you can use for feedback. You can ask follow-up questions. You can contact them at FetLife. There are plenty of ways where you can continue an ongoing conversation if you have something that you specifically want to bring up, even if it's not necessarily a question directly related to the content at hand. Which brings me to my next point, which is providing feedback. Providing feedback is so important. Oftentimes at conventions especially, they will give you feedback forms where you can rate a presenter, give specific comments about the content, and just basically let them know, is this somebody you want to have back in the space or not? Did they do a good job with the presentation? Did you get what you were expecting? And I think that's really important. And as well, even if you don't get forms like that, I think feedback is important. Look for ways to give back to the educator. Let them know what you thought. Was it great? Was it the best class you ever took? Were there things that left you questioning anything? Were there things that were gray areas or like confusing? And again, oftentimes presenters will stay after the end of the class is over in order to obtain that feedback, in order to continue particular conversations. And I think that is a really good time to give that feedback, both so the presenter has more information and also so you can ask your follow-up questions. You have time to have that deeper discussion without taking away from the rest of the classroom experience. And the dungeon or the space that's hosting them also knows to bring them back because they have good engagement, because people are interested in knowing more from them, because people were hopefully satisfied with the class. The last piece of advice that I have is also in relation to the notebook thing. At the end of the class, when you've completed all of your notes, after you have gone home, I do recommend transferring them or writing them out either as a digital copy or in a second notebook. And maybe this is just me being a complete nerd about this, but I like having something that's really neat and is going to be easy to read in the future when I need it for reference material. Also, having that repetition of writing is going to help you remember the things that you've just gone over when it's still fresh in your mind. You can add more details to the notes that you've already made so far. You can correct spelling errors. And it's also a good opportunity to kind of review the information and reflect on now what you want to know more. What at this point are you trying to seek out? And just generally allow you to kind of reflect on the experience as a whole. But that's all the advice that I have for going to a BDSM class. If you have any questions for me, please let me know down in the comment section below. Subscribe if you want to. I make videos twice a week. And if you want to, please go to my Patreon. That is what makes all of this possible. Thank you so much. And until I see you guys next time, hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.